The eyes of the world may be focused on Israel right now, but the war in Ukraine is still raging, and it has become deadlier than ever. In just 10 days this month, the Ukrainians blew up more than 100 Russian tanks, and in one 24-hour period, claimed to have killed 1,400 troops in the deadliest day of the war so far. Kyiv's men have opened up more bridgeheads across the Dnipro River near Kherson as they continue their unrelenting push toward Crimea. And US-made ATACMS missiles were deployed for the first time, devastating 2 airfields in one of the single biggest losses for Russian air power since Putin's invasion began. Nonetheless, officials in Kyiv are beginning to get nervous as the crisis currently engulfing Israel threatens to expand into a wider war. After 18 months at the top of President Biden's inbox, Ukraine now faces having to share attention and resources with Tel Aviv. Already, tens of thousands of American artillery shells originally destined for Eastern Europe are being diverted to the Middle East instead. And Europe appears unable to take up the slack as plans to get Kyiv 1 million shells have fallen behind schedule. Winter is fast approaching, and Ukraine's summer offensive has fallen well short of its objectives, leading to fears in Kyiv that Western leaders could soon start losing patience. This is how the war currently unfolding in Gaza makes Ukraine's future more uncertain than ever, and why, despite that, Kyiv is fighting back even harder. In early October, having suffered weeks of setbacks over the summer, Putin's generals tried to regain the battlefield initiative by launching an assault on the town of Avdiivka. Located just to the north of Donetsk city, it guards the H-20 highway, which is the gateway to parts of the Donbass that Russia has yet to capture. The Russians tried and failed to take it last winter, instead settling for the symbolic but strategically unimportant city of Bakhmut, around 30 miles away. Already, Avdiivka has been branded the new Bakhmut for the sheer bloody-mindedness with which Russia is now trying to capture it. As in Bakhmut, poorly trained soldiers are being thrown at Ukrainian lines in suicidal human wave attacks that have left the battlefield piled with corpses. In one intercepted phone call, a Russian soldier described it as slaughter, saying dozens of his comrades died trying and failing to capture a trench from just 8 Ukrainians. Russia is also throwing columns of precious tanks and armoured vehicles into the foray, which are getting mauled by landmines and anti-tank rockets. Between October the 10th and October the 17th, at least 109 tanks and other vehicles were confirmed destroyed in battlefield photos, meaning the true total is likely even higher. And on October the 19th, Ukraine claimed to have eliminated more than 55 tanks and killed 1,380 soldiers in what was likely the single deadliest day of the war to date. In total, Kyiv believes more than 6,000 Russians have died since the attack began, with little territory changing hands. But that doesn't mean the assault has been a total failure. In order to hold back the advance, Kyiv has been forced to redeploy troops from its southern front line, where they were trying to break through Russian defences blocking the road to Crimea. There were hopes that Ukraine would end the summer within easy artillery and missile range of the peninsula, but that now looks unlikely to happen. That perhaps explains why Kyiv is trying to open up more bridgeheads over the Dnipro River near Kherson and push into Russian lines on the opposite bank. Having already crossed the river at Aleshki and Kozachi-Laheri earlier in the summer, they have now made a third crossing at Poima, located between the two. Pro-Kremlin bloggers say the Ukrainians managed to land a sizable force and are pushing inland, opening up a broad front on the Russian side. That could create landing space for a much larger force, with Western analysts saying thousands of Ukrainian troops and hundreds of tanks are now massing in the area. Such an attack would yield potentially huge rewards, as it would bypass the Russian defences that have so far blunted Ukraine's march on Crimea. But it would also be extremely dangerous, risking thousands of troops and some of Ukraine's best equipment at a time when its Western allies are unlikely to supply any more. The insurance policy seems to be ATACMS, long-range American rockets that can be fired from HIMARS, which Kyiv has been after for months and which have finally arrived. Their first strike was not at Crimea, but 2 airfields in Berdyansk and Luhansk, which are occupied by Russia and used to house its helicopter fleets. Both were a success, and while Ukraine modestly claimed to have destroyed 9 helicopters, satellite imagery suggests the true toll could be as high as 17. Having given the missiles a test run, Kyiv now appears to be turning their sights on Crimea itself, with pro-Russian sources claiming ATACMS hit an anti-air battery on the peninsula this week. That likely gives a hint at Ukraine's long-term strategy of bombing the peninsula until it is no longer useful as a military base, forcing Russian troops to withdraw. Similar strikes have already been carried out using British and French Storm Shadow rockets, coupled with raids by Ukrainian special forces. However, it is unclear exactly how many ATACMS the US has handed over and whether any more will be coming. That's because President Biden now has to contend with war on 2 fronts, not just in Ukraine, but in Israel as well. America's close ally was attacked by Hamas terrorists on October the 7th and has rolled troops and tanks into Gaza in response. Israel is now facing down threats from Iran and its proxy network, which are allied to Hamas and which have already begun attacking from Lebanon and Syria. If those attacks escalate, it could drag the US directly into the fighting, tying up resources that may have otherwise gone to Kyiv. America has played down the risks in public, but behind the scenes, officials have said thousands of artillery shells meant for Ukraine are already going to the Middle East instead. And Europe appears unprepared to step up and fill the gap, having already fallen behind on its pledge to get Ukraine 1 million artillery shells by next March. Just a third of the total has been provided so far, as the continent struggles to ramp up production to deal with the war raging on its doorstep. And with North Korea now thought to be supplying Russia from its vast stock of shells, it could allow Putin's men to once again start advancing under the cover of huge artillery barrages of the kind they used last year in the Donbass. But events in Israel have not been all bad news for Ukraine. Struggling to get more funding for the war against Russia through Congress, President Biden has now rolled it together with funding for Israel in one big $100 billion bill that is more likely to pass. And Israel itself, which had been a reluctant ally of Ukraine until now due to its relations with Moscow, has been outraged by Putin's lack of sympathy following the Hamas attack. Amir Weitman, an outspoken member of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's party, told the Russia Today TV channel that Russia will pay the price for its betrayal and that we will make sure Ukraine wins once the war with Hamas is over. Israel has one of the most developed arms industry in the world, and Kyiv has been keen to get hold of its weapons, particularly the Iron Dome air defense. But fighting in Gaza is likely to take months at least, and if the conflict spreads, then there really is no telling when it will end, as evidenced by America's so-called forever wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. However long it lasts, Ukraine will be just one of competing priorities that its allies have to deal with, and if China decides to make a grab for Taiwan, it will slip down the list even further. But Ukraine will not stop fighting. President Zelensky maintains his aim to recover all of his lost territory, including and especially the crown jewel of Crimea. Progress is being made, albeit slowly, and Ukraine is inflicting such heavy casualties on Russia that President Putin will be unable to maintain them for long. The chances of the war ending in a stalemate now seem higher than ever, but having defied multiple long odds to make it this far, you wouldn't want to put anything past Kyiv. At least, not just yet. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos like this.